Done it again, I've done it again. All that I own is covered in sin. Every day is a new day, a new chance to break something I love. And I'm panicking, I need somewhere to aim. And I'm scrambling for someone to blame. You know something's wrong with you. Everyone's got more problems than you. Yeah. You got a speck in your eye. Never mind this plank in mine. The plank is mine. I'm panicking. I need somewhere to aim. And I'm scrambling for someone to blame, someone to blame, someone to blame, someone to blame. And every time I try to break free, everyone's out to get me. Why won't they leave me alone? Oh, every time I try to break free, everyone's out to get me. Why won't they leave me alone? Panicking, need somewhere to aim. And I'm scrambling for someone. I'm panicking.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another round of the podcast. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Just thought, and I could be wrong, but I thought that perhaps one or two of you would want to hear what we tracked yesterday here in the studio. We've transformed back into a podcast facility, but a mere 24 hours ago, we were recording Sweet Drums and Bass. Scrambled eggs. What's up, everybody? I see Joe, Ben, Jay, Matt, Will, Tim. Will's here. What's up, brother? Ben Holmes is here. Mark Sears is here. Paul's here. So anyway, that's just kind of just rough. I threw a couple EQ and a couple things, but that's pretty much just what we recorded in its natural form. Let me get the podcast up and ready because we are going to knock out episode 194 today. We're coming in on 200. I should probably do something for that. You should probably give me an idea for that because I don't have one. All right, so we need to do an intro. If this is your first time joining me live, I do this every week. This is a podcast that I record the whole thing live streaming, then I post video, audio versions, all that stuff. Sometimes I forget about the audio version and it's a few days late. Sometimes the video version has messed up audio, like last week. I'm just a bundle of mistakes, that's a good title. We're going to name this episode Bundle of Mistakes. You ready? File, rename. You can't see this, but I'm typing in bundle. Ask Joe 194. Bundle of mistakes. Because that's who I am. Shadow Wolf, I'm glad you're loving the song. I am too. They all turned out pretty well. I've got one I've got to kind of figure out what I'm doing on, but the rest of them are going to be pretty simple to go through. Okay, Ben, in all honesty, there's a little EQ in there. It's not completely as is. But you should have, okay, hang on. I got to show you this just because you're here live, and I'll probably feature this in a video at some point, but it was just so cool. So which song? We'll do that song I just had, the song Blame. So Brent Milligan played bass, which was super fun, but he brought over this box. It's called a limb pander, as in limiter and expander together. It's this old tube box he found on eBay for $100. And he said it is like the secret weapon for rock drums. And so I had a room mic, not a room mic, what I call a fat mic, just on the other side of that small room, kind of down and in the corner, to kind of capture the kick and snare and give me something of a, just kind of a thick sound that I could blend in with everything else. So we ran that mic through this thing, and here's what it sounds like. It is just disgusting, and I love it. Let me find where the drums are playing. Okay, right from the top. All right, here it is. You ready? Oh, hang on. Let me turn up the fader over here. All right, here we go. So that's with and without that fat mic in there. But turned out really well. Makes the room sounds much bigger than it is. You've probably seen the room. It's not big, and then half the floor is taken up with this weird raised thing. But I left it. I put 2 gobos in there to deaden one wall, but the rest I just left open. And for at least rock stuff, it turned out kind of cool. So anyway, I should show that more properly in a video, but you, being my favorite people who show up for this thing live, you get sneak peeks. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something fun. I'm going to, for the intro today, I'm going to go grab that gross drum sound and use it as my intro somehow. So let me go find it real quick. Blame media. Let's find the biggest one. That's called, let's find the fat mics. Fat mic, and the most recent one that's a decent size is this one. We'll call it 4. Okay, we'll bring that in. Ooh, yeah, there it is. There it is. Yeah, we're using that for the intro. Okay, the intro will be this. All right, here we go. Ready? All right. This is Ask Joe number 194, the Rock Drums edition. And then. This is Ask Joe number 194, the Rock Drums edition. Right there. Question, do I give them scratches beforehand? Yes, I like to. I like to have them familiar. The drummer was, it's funny, he was all, hang on, let's do this. Hang on. Whoa, hold on. Move over. Move over, track, I'm not ready for you. Rock. 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 That's kind of funny. Okay, so now we've got our intro. Bundle of mistakes. Somebody else had a good alliteration in here. What was it? Bundle of bumbling blunders. I might do that. Bundle of bumbling blunders. That's it. It has to be it. It's too silly to not use it. Bundle of bumbling blunders. I'm just trying to imagine how I'm going to say that. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it. So let me hit record on the video. Video is recording. Also, you may have noticed my whole space has changed, and this camera's crooked. It's like it's not quite in the right spot. Move. Huh? There we go. Now I'm centered. Snoopy's gone. My twins came in and stole Snoopy. Anyway, I'll get to that. Let's do the episode, shall we? Thank you for sticking with me for the first 11 minutes while we do silliness. Get your questions ready. Doesn't look like we have as many people here today, or you're all just being quiet and not commenting. Be sure to ask questions because that's what makes this Ask Joe. I've got one question from Ben over on Facebook, so you're on the spot. Don't let me down. Here we go in 3, 2, go. This is Ask Joe number 194, the Rock Drums edition. Rock. Back to another episode of Ask Joe. This is number 194. We got Big 200 coming up. We got to figure out what we're going to do for that. Maybe you can help me. We'll figure something out real nice. But it's a few weeks away, but we got time. So this episode is, we're calling it the Bundle of Bumbling Blunders, because I want to tell you about a few recent studio mistakes, both of which made me a little angry, one of which made me punch a door. The other was worse, but the first one made me... Anyway, we'll talk about that in a second. What you just heard in the intro, that is the fat mic from my drum recording session we had here yesterday for my EP. I had a Cascade Fathead ribbon that I was sitting just across the room from the drums, literally 6 feet away, really low to the ground in a corner, planning for it to be this thick-sounding drum. And then Brent Milligan, who's playing bass, he owns lots of cool toys. He brings over this box, crazy looking box called a limb pander, which is just an old vintage tube limiter / expander that just crushes whatever you put through it. So we ran that mic through that, and what you heard at the intro is that by itself with nothing on it. So is it good for jazz? No. Is it good for rock? Yeah. We'll see. When he starts hitting cymbals, it gets pretty washy and kind of crazy, but it's cool. So if nothing else, I could edit it up and just have it playing during the really just kick, snare, hi-hat parts. But people are saying to me, turn up my volume. I can do that. I could have it just edit it out so the cymbal parts don't have the fat mic and the other ones do. I don't know. We'll see. But what I do want to talk about is the mistakes made, one during that session and one during the session prior, or a session that happened about a week before that session. So here's what happened. First was just one where we were recording a live acoustic thing here, and we shot video for it. It's for an artist I'm producing. She wanted me to play acoustic while her husband played. And so I played, and on one I sang harmony too. Come in the studio the next morning to only to realize that I'd recorded his guitar and my vocal and his vocal and her vocal, but not my guitar. I recorded his guitar twice. So I got very angry. I walked over there and I punched the door. Then I sat back down and figured out this is actually easy to fix. I got out the mics again, re-recorded it over what was there, both playing and singing, dropped it in, and it worked fine. The second one is one I haven't fully processed yet, and I think I'm going to end up being pretty angry about it. But yesterday, recording drums, as you can imagine, maybe you've had a session like this before. When you're doing a live session like that with lots of mics, there's just a lot to keep track of. And I don't do big drum tracking sessions every day, so there's stuff that gets overlooked. don't want to talk about it. So anyway, I decided to run the snare, the top snare mic, through my ADL 700, which is a tube preamp channel strip with EQ and compression. So we were setting levels. I had all the faders up. I was listening to everything through my speakers because he's in the other room. And we decided to... sorry, I feel like people are saying I'm too quiet, but I've turned myself up. I think this is as good as it gets. Sorry, folks. Now I've lost my train of thought. I totally am distracted now. Let me start over. So running it through this ADL 700 top snare. I'm listening to all the mics. All the faders are up, and it sounds good. Everything's sounding good. I checked the kick. I checked the overheads. Overheads is what we focused on mainly. Swapped out mics and stuff like that. And the snare sounded fine in the mix. I turned on some compression, got it really snappy sounding. Great. Go through the whole session, track 5 songs. Come in later last night to listen, and the snare was sounding a little funny, so I soloed it only to find that while I had recorded the right, what am I trying to say? I'm sorry. I got people in the chat telling me anyway. I recorded the correct track, but I had set the compressor way too aggressive, and literally the snare track sounds like like the first couple milliseconds came through and everything else got slammed by the compressor. So it's essentially unusable. It does have some snap if I want to add in some snap, but I may end up needing to replace that, doing snare, sample replacement. Surprisingly though, I did mic the bottom snare, and I tried to mic it far enough away where I got some body in the recording. So the bottom snare mic sounds pretty good. Especially if you EQ some more lows in there and take out some of the harshness of the upper mids. With EQ, it actually sounds pretty good. So I may, because I'm stubborn, I may not sample replace, even though I botched the snare recording. It sounds good in the overheads. It sounds good in the rooms. So I've got a lot of kind of backups. But I totally did not record that well. I should have stopped and listened to the playback and listened to each thing. And I didn't because people were here and they were ready to go. And I, of course, rushed myself. And... yeah, it's pretty embarrassing. So when I'm embarrassed, I like to come on and tell it to thousands of people in a podcast because I don't know why. But hopefully, if you make dumb mistakes in the studio, it's normal. Now, I'm not saying it was a good thing. And I'm not saying, I'm glad I did it. No, I'm still kind of upset about it. But it is what it is, right? We do have cool technology like Trigger and Drumagog and all these sample replacing things that I've never used, to be completely honest, because I like the challenge of making the recorded drums work, and I may still stick to it. But obviously, the next time this won't happen. You may recall the last time when I was tracking in my studio for one of my projects, accidentally had the preamps on the overheads turned up way too loud, and the inputs on my console were turned down, so they overdrove the inputs and sounded weird. But it ended up working okay. It just is what it is, and I want to share in my quest to do Home Studio Corner. I want to present it real, and that means mistakes and all the screw ups. So, from one bundle of bumbling blunders to another, I hope you can relate. Boom. Alrighty. Sam has a question. Sam's a good buddy. So he's probably, that's more of a suggestion than a question. He says, it's just time to fix. Can you get the snare back in to sample that exact snare? Get 4 to 5 different hits, different velocity. Yes, that's a good idea. I can. He had it was an old 60s Ludwig kit, which I thought was cool. So I can probably get in and sample that. That's probably a great idea. Then it's actually, technically, I still recorded it. But honestly, the bottom snare mic, I wasn't expecting it to do much, but it actually sounds pretty good and beefy, and it didn't pick up really anything else. So I will explore that some. The good news is it's a perfect specimen for sample replacing because the waveform is just a little tick, and so it's very obvious. You just hear the snare and nothing else. So anyway, if you think less of me now, you probably should. Anyway, there you go. There you go. Got a good question from Ben Holmes, who is a great artist. Check out his stuff. I did some critiques for him and then mastered his latest release, and he is busy working on the next one, which I love. just getting in there and making more music. Ben's here on the live stream, actually, but he asked a question on Facebook. Says, when writing a song, do you sometimes know there's a good song in there, but it's just not really working? And if so, what do you usually do? My friend Frankie Barenko, who I'm producing her EP, asked me kind of a similar question last week during that session where I forgot to record myself. And she said kind of the same thing. When I sit down to write, I have to be in a certain place and emotionally, blah, blah, blah. And then I end up being too critical and not liking anything I wrote. She's like, what do you suggest? And I said kind of the same thing I'm going to say to you, Ben. I suggest just finishing. If you've started a song that you don't think's great, I say finish it and then write another one. I think we have way too many people with half-finished songs. And I'm not saying that's wrong. That's just the way I work is I like to finish them. And if I finish it and then completely rewrite it, which you've seen me do in that Songwriting Corner series, that's fine. Or if I finish it and it never sees the light of day, that's fine. If I finish it and end up just stealing one part of that song and putting it into another song, that's fine too. It's all stuff I wrote. But for me, the biggest thing is just finishing. For example, with this EP, there are 5 songs on there. There's one that I'm still on the fence if it's going to make it on the EP. I think it will. And then I wrote like 8, and 3 of them just didn't make the cut at all. So, or 7 or 8. So ideally, would I have written more and had more to choose from? Sure, but that was kind of the way it played out for me. So yeah, to answer your first question, yes, there's songs that I'm writing where I'm like, this just isn't working. If it's really early in the process, I'll just stop and start something new. But if I've written a verse and a chorus, I'll go ahead and finish. Great example of that is the song What I Know Now, which I have two videos in my Songwriting Corner series on that song. One was very folky and cheesy. Then the next, I rewrote the music entirely into something really bluesy and rocky. And I'll have to do a future episode of that because the recording ended up being completely different from that. So who knows if that's the one. I'm not sure if it's going to make it on the record. But anyway, sometimes things have to evolve. All right. Let me go through your questions here in the live chat. Got some good ones coming in. And by the way, if you're listening to this recording and you've never made it live, Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Central Time. That's 2 on the East Coast. It's 11 on the West Coast. And it's a different time if you're in a different part of the world. But if you can make it, you can sign up to my calendar, homestudiocorner.com/calendar. You can subscribe. It'll show up in your phone every Tuesday with a notification that it's happening, and a link so you can get here. It's all very convenient. Love to have you here. All right, it's 7 p.m. in the UK, by the way. Thank you, Ben. Okay, Daniel says, I'm getting married soon. Congratulations. Marriage is awesome. There are a lot of people out there who bash marriage. It is difficult, sure. But it's awesome. So congratulations. It says, I'm getting married soon and we'll be moving into an apartment. I'm looking into acoustic treatment and wondering if 2-inch thick isolation panels would work as bass traps or if RLX would be better. You know, Daniel, I'm not really an expert when it comes to acoustic treatment. For bass trapping, I think my first step for you would be just getting some treatment. So if you're in an apartment, it's going to have drywall, and it's just going to sound nasty until you put something up just to deaden some of those reflections. The thicker it is, the better. It'll get lower frequencies, but I would do that first. Bass traps are great. I actually don't have bass traps in my room because it's a funny shape, and I'm just kind of making it work. But absorption, like all these panels behind me, they're all absorbing stuff, and they're thick, so they soak in a lot of frequencies. So I don't know as far as using 2-inch isolation panels. If you use them in the corners, it may work as a little bit of a bass trap. Mass is your friend. So that's why I like the RLX Leonards, those bass traps in the corner. They work okay. I've had those before. They're thick though. They're huge and they sit in the corner. So bass traps necessarily have to be big because bass frequencies are big. So I would say just kind of do the best that you can. But for me, kind of first priority is the upper mid reflections that just cause you not to be able to hear things well. And then even with bass trapping and all that stuff as proper as you can get it, your room's still going to have problems in the low end. There's no way around that. You can improve it with things like bass trapping and things like that, but you're still going to have to learn what your room sounds like, where it's flawed, and then mix around that. Kind of just the way it goes, especially in home studios. What popular records do you use for reference tracks? You know, I'm bad at reference tracks, to be honest. I won't use them while mixing a whole lot. I will use them in between mixing. If I'm kind of lost on a mix and just don't feel like I'm getting the right tone, I'll go listen to a record that has some of the tones I feel like I'm going for, and it'll kind of energize me to go back. Lately, I've been digging stuff by Kaleo and the band Congos. They just have massive, kind of distorted drum sounds, and I just really dig that. So for the heavier rock stuff I'm working on, I'm going for just chaotic and gross drum sounds, and the vocals are a lot darker, which is just what I like. So those are some things I've been listening to lately. A master pedal steel guitar player agreed to play on 4 of my band's old and current mixes. He sent me back the takes. I've never mixed pedal steel before. Any general tips as I get started? I mean, it's kind of like anything else. Does it sound good? Do you like it? For me, a lot of times on pedal steel, they probably put some reverb on there. I tend to put more and just let it kind of swim. It depends on the song. I tend to like it to have some reverb. Sometimes like a slapback delay on that sustain can give it some depth that's kind of cool. Or it may sound perfect and you just leave it alone. Especially, you said he's a master pedal steel guitar player, so my guess is, it's a big assumption, that the tracks he sent you probably sound pretty good. So don't feel like you have to do anything if it sounds great. Joey, watch you create songs from scratch has been incredibly helpful. The songs you've come up with so far are really great. You are the man, Joe. Watching you has greatly helped me learn. Thank you, Joey. I thought that was a question. I didn't mean to just read a compliment, but thanks. Now that's immortalized on the podcast. Can you see my earlier question about phase? Yes, Tommy. I'm working my way up. Just patience, possess ye your souls. When I play my song in the mastering software Studio One, the phase meter has the line solid to the right. I noticed you had a song with no solid line. Do I need to do something for phase alignment? If it's solid to the right, I think that means, if it's angled like a diagonal line, I think that means you have something panned to the right. If it's straight up and down, it's mono. If it's angled, typically it looks like a scattering of things. So my guess is maybe your song just has everything panned to one side. That's my guess. It's the kind of question I can't really answer, but good luck. You got any tips for mixing live recordings? I've been recording at worship at church, but struggle to get the vocals to sit. Recorded with a 58. A lot of times live recordings, for me, ironically, they end up sounding pretty clean, and nothing sounds super great until I put like reverb on everything. So like a room sound that kind of sounds a little bit like the room they were recorded in, and then that tends to kind of loosen everything up and let it sit better. That's something I would do. As far as vocals, getting them to sit in the mix, I mean, it's no different in live recording than anything else. You gotta, the biggest variable is the source itself, and then from there, it's EQ, compression, effects, things like that. There's no really one way. I'd have to sit and mix it to tell you what I would suggest for that song. Jeremy says, Joe, do you mix in mono? If so, how far do you go before coming back out into stereo? Just EQ to make space for each instrument? Jeremy, I do and I don't. It's kind of like anything that's a good habit. You get away from it and then come back to it. For me, I haven't been doing a lot of it lately. If I'm having trouble with EQ and I keep EQing something and it's not working, I'll flip to mono to kind of force myself to really deal with it in mono. I don't spend a ton of time in mono, I'll be honest. At least right now, today, Valentine's Day 2017, which I haven't even mentioned Valentine's Day. I'm such a hopeless non-romantic, apparently. But I just don't do it a lot. And I do want to say something about the idea of EQing to make space for each instrument. I'm sure I've said that a million times. You got to be careful with that idea. And I'm not saying you're doing this. That phrase comes at me a lot. And people have this idea of I'm gonna go to this track and I'm gonna boost this frequency, and because I boosted that frequency on this track, I'm gonna come over here to this track and cut that same frequency. But it's never that mathematical. And I think we would love to have a formula that says boost this and then cut this over here. And occasionally, like twice in my life, I can remember doing exactly that, where I boosted this guitar here and cut this guitar here in that same frequency, and it worked really well. But all in all, for me, I'm making changes to tracks to make them work in the mix. I'm not trying to EQ the bass so I make room for the kick drum. I hear that a lot. I just don't do that. The kick drum and the bass are two separate things. They occupy the low end, but I've never really had them quote unquote fighting each other. I get the kick drum sounding great, I get the bass sounding great, and I make sure they sound great together, but I'm never EQing one while thinking about the other, if that makes sense. Maybe I'm weird, maybe I'm wrong. That's just, I tend to just listen, and if something needs attention, I give it attention and I fix what the problem is, or I enhance something that needs to be enhanced, and then I move on. I'm not thinking as holistically about if I did something here. I'm not thinking of it like a zero-sum game where, all right, I did this here, now I've got to do that over here to make up for this that I did. For me, it doesn't work that way. So anyway, rant over. Let me see. Paul Lucas, when using top-down mixing, what do you put on your master? Well, lately, I've been putting a multi-band compressor on there. And just recently, as in last week, I added a regular bus compressor. So historically, I've always had some sort of compressor on my mix bus with like a 30 millisecond attack, 100 millisecond release, similar to what the settings would be on an SSL compressor. Then I switched to the multi-band that kind of helped brighten things up because my mixes were getting a little dark. And then recently, I've put both. So the regular compressor first and then the multi-band, and they're both doing a little bit of work and adding a little bit of volume. I don't know if I like that full time, but I worked on a mix the other day and I really liked what it was doing. So I'll probably stick with that for a while until I have another idea. Here's a question. What's your favorite song you've ever written? Golly, probably the most recent one I wrote. Honestly, that's how I tend to like whatever I wrote last. My favorite album, I'll answer that because I can't think of it. There's not one song popping in my head. Favorite album is Better This Way because the songs are it's a lot of kind of take you on a journey, a lot of processing stuff internally, dealing with stuff. And I feel like just as a whole, those were a very cohesive group of songs. So there's my non-answer to your very specific question. When you move from recording to mixing your own songs, do you try to start with fresh ears or is it a continuation of the process? Good question. I had this, somebody asked something like this recently. It's an ongoing thing for me. I don't almost ever take something I've recorded and then strip all the plugins and start over unless it's just not working. But usually the stuff that I've done along the way stays or I adjust it a little bit, but I understand the idea of wanting to start from scratch and feeling that desire to, everything I've done up to this point wasn't really done intentionally for mixing, so I'm going to get rid of it and then give it 100% of my focus. But if it's good, it's good, right? If I add an EQ to my snare drum the day after I record it, and that EQ stays there through the entire process, I've gotten used to that sound, I like it, and it's working, I'm not going to go change it just to change it, which I understand the desire to do that. We have this desire to go in and change everything. Kind of like when you're producing for an artist. Sometimes they give you a song and it's great as it is. You just need to record it. But there's this little desire in me that if I'm producing this, I've got to make changes. Like I got to change the key of the song or the tempo or the time signature so that I've left a stamp on it and made it mine. And that's kind of dumb. Sometimes songs need to be left alone and you've got to know when to do that. So if you tend to have that same approach of I got to go through and mess with everything, just give yourself permission to be a little lazy and step back and not touch everything and see how many, who can mix this song in the fewest amount of touches. Kind of like Name That Tune. Hey, there's an idea. I can mix this song in 12 moves. Can you take that too far? Yes. But for the number of people I meet who tend to, just by the way they ask their questions, I can tell they tend to do too much. You could stand to go the other direction for a little while. Ben has a follow-up question. Do you mix the same Studio One song or is it a new one? I usually do everything in the same session. I will save versions, which is the way Studio One kind of gets around having a bunch of save as. You can do save as, it's fine. I do different versions so I can always get back to. So today, when I bounced out all the raw tracks from the session yesterday, I saved a version of that called post-tracking. So if I ever want to get back to just how the session was there and kind of see how it is, I can do that. And it's all saved under the same kind of session. Do I have the user button mapped on my fader port? No, I don't. If I did, I would probably map it to I don't know. I'm sure there's a function that I use a lot that I have to go find. Maybe the click, turning the click on and off. Although I could just press the letter C here, and that's over here. So it's a little farther away over here, so maybe not. Although I do use it for transport, even though spacebar is right here. So I don't know. But no, the answer is no, I don't use that. Daniel says, is there any mixing tricks, effects, or gear to avoid if you're trying to go for vintage sound like the Beatles or Led Zeppelin? I don't know if there's stuff to avoid. To me, and this is a way oversimplification, if I'm going for vintage, I usually just roll off some high frequencies. You know what I mean? Like everything that if you bought a modern XYZ today, you know, a clean preamp and a nice clean like NT1A microphone, everything's going to be nice and bright. But then vintage stuff, if you listen, it's not bright. Everything's kind of rolled off and almost too dark, I would say. So to me, a lot of it's just, and that's I kind of lean towards the darker stuff anyway, which is an interesting sidebar. If any of you are Dueling Mixes members, I tend to lose the votes if my mix is too dark, or if my mix, you know, for me feels just right, and then Graham's mix is a little more hyped and a little brighter, he gets the votes. It could be that his is a better mix, but we've noticed it's flipped around too, where if I have a brighter mix, I get the votes and he doesn't, to where we're conditioned that we think brighter is better. It seems louder, more exciting. I tend to appreciate a mix that's dark without being muddy. Go listen to Kaleo, that record AB. Those vocals are not bright. They're kind of distorted. There's a lot of slapback delay and things like that. And but it grooves. And it's not like all the highs are rolled off, but it's not got all that super sparkly top end that you tend to associate with something clean. As far as gear, I don't tend to say you need this type of kick drum or this type of preamp to get a good this sound, because you can do some cool things after the fact. I will say, having used that limb pander thing yesterday on the room mic, I could get something somewhat close to that using, you know, just a distortion plug-in and a really aggressive compressor. But it was pretty cool to just have a box that just gave me this rock drum sound by running a room mic through it. Also, the microphones you use will play a big difference. Ribbon mics are nice and dark and will keep things from getting too shrill. They can be muddy too. Dynamic mics are not as bright as condensers, so maybe if you're going more vintage, you stay away from some of the condensers, or you get some that are vibey and thick sounding. Those are some of my ideas. I could be completely wrong. Go get an old tape machine if you want. I don't know. But those are my initial thoughts. How do you know, this is from Ladraz, how do you know when to give up on a song? After you write, record, and mix it, and it still doesn't sound how you want. For me, the giving up phase, if it makes it, there's a first initial cut that happens before I record it. I've done this recently. First, if I write it and I finish it, which I mentioned earlier, I really like to finish it even if I don't like it. If I like it once it's done, then and if it fits with whatever my next album project is, it goes on the list to add to the album. Then if I record some scratch tracks to a tempo, to a click to kind of get it to the drummer, if I still like it, then that's kind of the next cut point. And then I'll record drums to it and maybe bass. And if at that point I'm still not digging it, then it's gone. I'm not going to spend any more time on it. I had one from last week that I recorded scratch tracks for, and then I was thinking it's just not a very good song, and the scratch doesn't sound good, and it doesn't fit with the other songs on this EP, so I ditched it. Will it come back in another album? Maybe, but it's not a song I'm super attached to, so I don't know if that'll happen. We aren't scrolling along anymore. There we go. When you make your videos, you don't wear headphones. Are you listening through your speakers? And if so, how do you handle bleed? Good question. Yeah, I started doing that sometime in the last year because I realized I have a mute button. So when I press this button, you'll hear my voice anymore, but I just turned it back on and now you can hear me. Those of you who are listening to the recording heard me that whole time, but I muted myself out to the stream. That's kind of how I do it. When I'm playing something for an extended period of time, I hit mute and then I turn it back on and keep talking. But sometimes I just let it play because it doesn't matter. It picks up a little bit of bleed. But like this whole podcast, you don't hear a lot of like, oh man, I hear that bleed. I've got a gate on this mic, so it doesn't, when I stop talking, it's pretty quiet. If I turn the gate off, You hear a little more room noise, a little quieter. Again, that's for the folks on the live stream and the video. But there's a little bit of bleed, but it just doesn't. I mean, how many live recordings have you heard where the vocal is pretty isolated, but there's still a bunch of sound? It just works. It just works. You're going to hear the direct sound of the audio that I'm playing, the mix that I'm playing is going to be way louder than whatever's coming through here. Is there technically a little phase? Probably. Does it matter? No, you're listening on YouTube, right? It's the best audio quality you'll ever hear anyway. But then a lot of times I will mute it if it's something that's really, I want to make sure there's nothing interfering, or I want to cough, then I'll mute it. Or sneeze. Johnny Lipsham's here. He says, what are your thoughts on sidechaining bass guitar to kick drums? Is it just a stylistic thing for you or something not genre specific? Johnny, I've done that maybe once in the last 10 years. I just never think it's necessary. I could see doing it if it was like a pop dance thing or like a really heavy, big, huge kick drum on like an R&B track where I really want that the bass really is getting in the way of the kick. But otherwise on rock stuff, I just don't do it. I know plenty of people who swear by it. I just haven't found it necessary to make the kick drum turn the bass down. I feel like they go together nicely. They're meant to be together, and I don't want to tear them apart. I want to rip apart the family. Shadow Wolf says, oh, nope, I already answered that one. Paul says, how do you deal with click bleed? Do I need to pan it to one side away from the mic? I do that. So if I'm recording guitar, like the other day, I was turned like this to my left, so I'm looking to my right to the screen while it's recording. So I pan the click to my right ear, which is the farthest away from the mic it could be. Still, depending on the song and how loud you need the click and all that, there was still some click bleed in the recording. But what I find is the click bleed is just really at the end when I strum that final chord. So what I do is I just turn the click off. So I finish the take, there's click, I just turn the click off, leave it recording, and I just play that last chord of the song or the last bar, and then I let that ring out with no click playing, and then I just edit that in and drop it in at the end. Works like a charm. Sometimes, occasionally, you can get away with the click not bleeding on acoustic guitar, but it happens. It's totally fine. It is totally fine. Glenn, go-to time-based effects for your rock vocal. Stereo delay, mono, slap, reverbs. I love a slapback delay. I would use that every time, like on every song on this EP so far, I've put slapback on the vocal. It's just vibey, and I don't have it be too bright, and occasionally I'll put distortion on the slapback delay. But usually it's just mono delay. I like stereo slapback. I mixed a song recently that had that, and it was kind of cool, but it's pretty subtle. And then occasionally reverb for big stuff. But no, for a rock vocal, that's my go-to. I love it. And ideally, honestly, I mixed a song once where they had used one of those big Moog delays, like the Moger Foger. Not the Moger Foger, but the old... Remember that big... If they don't make them anymore, but the big Moog pedals... Moog delay. Go Google Moog delay pedal. Yeah, the old ones. Like, yeah, I'm showing one on reverb.com. Let me switch over real quick. This thing right here. You see that guy? Make this bigger. Get bigger. See that? Yeah, it is the Moger Foger. I think that's the one. Anyway, I would love to have one of those and run things through it. That just would make me happy. But yeah, I mean, you can get a cool delay sound with just a delay, roll off some highs, distort it a little bit if you want. But yeah, I dig a good delay, big time. Do you get into music licensing? I don't, Mark. It's a good question. I led a panel out in California last March, and it was 3 guys from different parts of the music licensing world. So there was a guy from Taxi. There was a guy who was I forget what they're called. Sam, you can help me with that. Music director for shows like Girls and maybe The Walking Dead and things like that. And they talked a little bit about it. It's cool. I think if I just had the time, I'd put my music, make sure my music was in a place where people could find it and use it for that. I know a lot of people who write specifically for licensing, so for commercials and things like that. I know it's a different world than it was several years ago. It's a lot more competitive. But I've had friends who've had good success with it. I just don't. I've not made it a focus, and I don't know if I want to. What settings on the back of your SM7B do you use? Well, Right now I have it set to flat, which I think means it's a little mid scoop. Honestly, haven't touched it in years. I just leave it. And I don't roll off the low end. Most of your tracking still through the Studio Live. Any drawbacks or frustrations? So yeah, everything I track is through this PreSonus Studio Live, the original 24. Drawbacks, I don't really have any other than, I monitor everything off the board, which means I don't have any latency problems. It's not going through the DAW and coming back. Downside of that is there's a possibility that the recording is getting jacked up, but I'm hearing it fine on the board. That's never happened. I guess that can happen, but I really dig it. I can do all my headphone mixes here. It doesn't bog down my computer at all. So yeah, I'm a big fan of it. Let me see if there are any other questions that I missed. Y'all started kind of pounding those out. Al said, is there a way to make Studio One, or to make the automation in Studio One be a relative change as opposed to an absolute change? What I mean is, say I set the volume fader to some position like -6, and then I write automation on the track for volume. Most of the time, Studio One will simply move the fader to the automation levels. So you mean like a gradual change? Just draw in a line, the diagonal line. So yeah, you can draw that in. I'm not really following your question though, so sorry. What monitors and monitor controller do you use? I've got let's go on a little tour. Right there. Oh, this cable's, there you go. Studio One, I'm sorry, these are Mackie EX66s that I've had for 10 years. I won them in a Christmas song contest when I worked at Sweetwater. They've got dual 6-inch woofers, and they got a lot of low end, and they feel pretty good. And then for a controller, I use this, which is the Central Station from PreSonus, which has this remote control that I can use for volume and selecting inputs, etc. Don't you like it when I take you on a little journey with the webcam? That's fun. What gauge strings do I use? Usually medium. Favorite food? I'm on a big pho kick right now. I love me some noodles and broth. And I think since we've gotten down to food and string gauge, I think we are scraping the bottom of the proverbial barrel. So I'm going to go ahead and say we are done for the day. And thank you so much for hanging out if you were here live. And for those of you, oh goodness, I have messed up everything. Wow, I tried to move the music while I was talking. That never works out well for me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And that's it. I'll see you next week. Bye. Kind of botched that outro. But I can just move the music today. And thank you so much for hanging out if you were here live. And for those of you, oh goodness, I have messed up everything. Hang on. See you next week. It's funny that I made a bunch of blunders for an episode that was called The Bundle of Bumbling Blunders. Not blenders, guys. Not blenders. Let's see how this sounds. This is Ask Joe number 194, the Rock Drums edition. Did I say Mackie? They're M Audio. Sorry. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Ask Joe. This is number 194. We got Big 200 coming up. We got to figure out what we're going to do for that. Maybe you can help me. We'll figure something out. Real nice. But it's a few weeks away, but we got time. So this episode is, we're calling it the Bundle of Bumbling Blunders, because I want to tell you about a few recent studio mistakes, both of which made me a little angry, one of which made me to all the mics, all the faders are up, and it sounds good. Everything's sounding good. I checked the kick, I checked the overheads. Overheads is what we focused on mainly, swapped out mics and stuff like that, and the snare sounded fine in the mix. I turned on some compression, got it really snappy sounding, great. Go through the whole session, track 5 songs. Come in later last night to listen, and the snare was sounding a little funny, so I soloed it only to find that while I had recorded the right What am I trying to say? I'm sorry. I got people in the chat telling me anyway. We have way too many people. Since we've gotten down to music while I was talking, that never works out well for me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And that's it. I'll see you next week. Bye. This is Ask Joe number 194. Welcome back to another episode of Ask Joe. This is number 194. We got Big 2 coming up. All right, that feels fine. Let me get ready to export it. Al, as a percentage change on volume automation. No, I mean, that's a part of, there is no way to mathematically do it. A decibel is a certain percentage change. I don't know what the percentage is, but yeah, I think you just have to do it with your ears. I don't think if there was a way to do a percentage change, it'd be very musical anyway. I will say I do use this shortcut in Studio One. If I click on a piece of audio and I press plus, it bumps it up 3 dB and down 3 dB. So I do that a lot, which is cool. So I can do that on an individual like phrase in lieu of automation, which is kind of cool. All right, folks. I think I am done. I've got more things I need to do. Lots to do. So let me go get this thing exported, uploaded, posted. So those of you who missed it, Studio Dude 1, I'm sorry you got here too late. Try to be on time not next week. Next week, there is no episode next week, by the way, but there will be a cool interview that I'll be posting. So look out for that. And yeah, I think that's oh, you can't see me. Hello. Hi, here I am again. That's it for this week. So thank y'all so much. I'll see ya. Bye-bye. Whoop, whoop, whoop. There we go.